Dead Girl Underwater. I mean, come on. That title alone just pulls you in, right? Like, it's straight out of some true crime podcast. But here's the twist. We're not dealing with a real-life case at all. Instead, we're going to be diving into excerpts from a fictional narrative. And get this. It's told from the perspective of the dead girl herself.
It's so interesting because right off the bat, we've got this narrator, and we already know she's not reliable. I mean, she's the one guiding us through this whole story, but it's all filtered through her own experiences and, the fact that she's dead. So there's no way for her to clear anything up.
Okay, so we're already in kind of murky waters here. We're trying to figure out what happened, but how much can we actually trust what we're reading? I guess that's our mission for this deep dive, to go through these excerpts and analyze the suspects and theories, see if we can uncover some kind of truth hidden beneath the surface.
And that's where the author is so clever with their writing. The way this story is put together, it keeps you guessing the whole time. It's like a puzzle box, but with words. Red herrings everywhere, and perspectives that keep shifting around.
So to set the scene, we're dropped right into this high school camping trip. There's a party going on by a lake, music darkness, the kind of teenage recklessness. Yeah, that feeling. It's exciting and dangerous at the same time. And our dead girl, she sneaks out with her friend Zoe. Seems harmless enough at first, but it ends up setting off this whole chain of events that leads to tragedy.
And the author uses all these sensory details to pull you right into that atmosphere. The music, the laughter, the whispers down by the water. But there's also this sense of something bad about to have, this subtle shift in tone that hints at the darkness that's coming.
And then, of course, the girl doesn't come back to her tent. So the search starts, and it quickly turns into a full-blown panic. Dogs, helicopters, the works.
Yeah.
But it's all for nothing. They find her body miles away from the campsite, and the autopsy says she drowned.
Yeah. Now, you might think this is where the story becomes predictable, right? A tragic accident, case closed. But no, the author throws in a curveball. Suddenly, the suspicion falls on Zoe's twin brother, Tom, who's had a crush on the dead girl for a long time.
And there's even some physical evidence connecting him to her. They found traces of his skin on her clothes. Plus, his story keeps changing when he talks to the police. So yeah, red flags everywhere.
But then we get this twist, and it comes straight from the dead girl herself. She reveals that her and Tom actually had a little romantic thing going on that night. So now the whole way we see their relationship and Tom's potential motives, it all changes completely.
Makes you wonder why he didn't just tell the police the truth, right?
Yeah.
Was he trying to protect her reputation? Or was there something more going on, something darker?
And right when we're wrestling with those questions, another character jumps into the spotlight, Cassandra, a classmate, who claims she saw Zoe and the dead girl arguing earlier that evening.
Now, Cassandra, she's a fascinating character because right away you get the feeling that she might not be the most trustworthy source. She's known to exaggerate stories, and she seems to be really enjoying being a part of this whole investigation, almost like she's playing a role.
It's a classic example of how the author uses an unreliable narrator to keep the suspense going. You're always questioning who to believe. And even tiny little details, they start to feel important because you just don't know what's true and what's made up.
So what exactly did Cassandra say she saw? Well, according to her, Zoe and the dead girl were arguing about Tom. So that suggests a possible motive for Zoe, maybe jealousy. But can we really take her word for it?
That's the big question, isn't it? And to make things even more complicated, Cassandra also mentions seeing the dead girl with a group of boys who supposedly had access to tranquilizers.
Whoa, okay, hold on, tranquilizers. Now, where did those come from? And what role did they play in everything that happened that night? We're left wondering, was this a horrible accident or something much more sinister?
Welcome back. So before we jump back into this whole web of mystery and intrigue, I think it's important to remember that we're seeing this entire story through the eyes of the dead girl. Everything is filtered through her. Her voice, her thoughts, her perceptions, it's all we have to guide us.
And that's what makes this so compelling, right? But it also makes it so tricky because we're relying on a voice from beyond the grave. And by its very nature, that voice is limited. It's subjective. It really makes you wonder, how much can we actually trust what we're being told?
Exactly. The author is playing with us, using this unreliable narrator to keep us guessing and off balance. It's like trying to see the truth through a window that's all fogged up.
So let's talk about Cassandra for a minute. She's this character who really seems to thrive on drama, always inserting herself right into the middle of the investigation. All her claims about Zoe and that argument, the late-night visit to the teacher, it all feels a bit calculated, don't you think?
It does, and it makes you question what her motives really are. Is she actually trying to help, or is she just looking for attention, trying to shape the whole story to fit her own agenda?
Maybe she's trying to make sure no one suspects her. Or maybe she's just someone who loves chaos, someone who gets a weird sense of importance from being connected to this whole tragedy. It's unsettling because it reminds you that even with all the grief and loss, people can still be selfish and unpredictable.
It's a reminder that we shouldn't just accept things at face value, especially when we're dealing with people's personal accounts and narrators we can't fully trust. And that brings us to another important part of this story, the whole idea of truth and how we perceive things.
The story itself seems to be questioning whether there even is a single absolute truth. We're given all these conflicting accounts, perspectives that keep shifting, and the main character herself, she even admits that her own memory isn't perfect.
It's like the author saying, look, there might not be one clear-cut answer here. Instead, they're asking us to sit with that ambiguity, to accept that multiple truths can exist at the same time, and to be okay with not knowing for sure.
It's a powerful message, you know? Especially these days when we're constantly bombarded with information and everyone's always looking for simple answers. This story forces us to slow down, think critically, question everything we think we know.
And it reminds us that sometimes the best stories aren't about finding a solution. They're about the journey, the complexities, the subtle details of human experience.
Speaking of human experience, let's go back to those suspicions surrounding Tom. Even though the dead girl told us about their romantic encounter, his story keeps changing when he talks to the police. That still raises questions.
His behavior definitely seems suspicious, but that doesn't automatically mean he's guilty. What if he was just trying to protect the dead girl's reputation, even after she was gone? Or maybe he was dealing with his own guilt and confusion, struggling to understand what happened that night.
It's interesting because the story doesn't give us a clear answer. Instead, it makes us think about how complex Tom's character really is. His love for the dead girl, his fear of being judged, his possible role in the events that led to her death.
And that brings us to another theme that keeps popping up in this story. The pressure to conform, especially in high school, where the social environment can be so intense. Remember how the dead girl admits that she brushed off Tom's advances because she was worried about what other people would think?
That's something a lot of people can relate to, right? That feeling of wanting to fit in, to avoid being judged. Even if it means ignoring your own feelings or what you really want, it's a universal experience. And the author uses it to show the dead girl's vulnerabilities, her insecurities, the pressures she faced every day.
It's not just her either. Think about Cassandra and her need to be the center of attention, to be seen as important and in the know. It points to this deep desire for validation, for a sense of belonging.
It makes you wonder how those pressures, those anxieties might have played a role in what happened that night. Could it be that the characters weren't acting out of malice, but out of this desperate need to protect themselves, to hold on to their social status, to escape being judged by their peers?
Those are all possibilities the author wants us to consider. And it's through exploring those motivations, those flaws, those vulnerabilities, that the story really comes to life.
So while we're trying to solve this mystery, trying to understand who might be responsible for the dead girl's death, we're also being asked to look beyond the surface, to recognize the humanity of all the characters involved, even the ones who might seem suspicious or unlikable.
Exactly. And that's the power of fiction. It can challenge our preconceived notions, make us empathize with people who are different from us, help us see the world through multiple lenses.
Now, even though the teacher has seemingly been cleared of any direct involvement in the dead girl's death, his behavior is still pretty unsettling. His empty tent, his erratic actions, that inappropriate proposal he made to Zoe, it all points to someone who's deeply troubled.
His actions definitely raise some serious questions about the abuse of power, about the blurred lines between adults and students, about the potential for manipulation and exploitation in a place that should be safe.
And it makes you wonder if there's more to his story than we know. Could he be hiding something? Could his actions be connected to the dead girl's death in ways we haven't figured out yet?
Those are all good questions, and I think the author purposely leaves us feeling uneasy with this nagging suspicion that there's more to uncover beneath the surface.
It's like we're being challenged to be our own detectives, putting the clues together and drawing our own conclusions.
And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not about being given all the answers. It's about actively taking part in the process, interpreting things, analyzing the information, thinking critically.
So we've talked about the complexities of the characters, the unreliable nature of memory and how we perceive things, and the pressures that might have contributed to what happened that night. But there's still one piece of the puzzle we haven't really addressed: the dead girl herself.
We've been so focused on the mystery surrounding her death that we haven't really explored who she was as a person, her hopes, her dreams, her struggles.
We know she was a good student, popular, but Reading between the lines, you start to see that there's more to it. Like something else was going on beneath the surface.
Right. There are these little hints about her vulnerabilities, her insecurities, all the pressure she felt to be perfect.
Remember that part where she talks about her parents always pushing her to be the best at everything?
Yeah.
It's kind of sad because you can tell she really wants them to be proud of her.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she resents being defined by what they want.
Yeah. It's like she's stuck in this role of being successful, afraid to show who she really is, afraid to let them down. And that constant pressure, that feeling of being judged all the time, it can be so isolating, especially for a teenager.
Totally. And then there's that line that always sticks with me, the one about Cassandra being the girl whose name everyone forgets. It just shows how disillusioned she was with high school. Like she already understood how shallow and fleeting those relationships can be.
It's like she's seeing through the whole facade, sensing the emptiness beneath all the popularity and social status. And that cynicism, that weariness, it runs through her entire story.
Makes you wonder if she ever felt truly seen or understood by anyone. Did she have someone she could confide in, someone she could be totally honest with? Or was she carrying all that weight alone, putting on a brave face while silently struggling?
That's a question that hangs over the whole story, and it goes back to that theme we keep coming back to. The pressure to conform, to fit in, to present this perfect image to the world, even if it means sacrificing who you really are.
And you have to ask yourself, did that pressure, that fear of judgment, play a part in her decision to sneak out that night? Was it like a subconscious act of rebellion? A desperate attempt to break free from the life that everyone expected her to live?
It's definitely a possibility, and it speaks to this basic human need, the need for agency, for control, for the freedom to be yourself without anyone else's rules.
But freedom can be dangerous too, can it? Especially when you mix it with impulsiveness and naivete
Yeah.
and put it in a risky environment. The story seems to suggest that while she wanted to be free, she might not have fully understood the consequences of her actions.
And that's the real tragedy. Her desire for freedom, her longing to escape the pressure and expectations, might have ultimately led her to a point of no return.
It's a reminder that even choices that seem small can have huge unintended consequences, especially when you're a teenager. It's a time of intense emotions, hormones going crazy, constantly trying to figure out who you are.
And it brings us back to the importance of empathy. We can analyze all the clues and motives, try to come up with a logical explanation for what happened. But in the end, we have to remember that these are real people with complicated emotions, mistakes, a whole web of circumstances that led to this awful outcome.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Dead Girl Underwater, I want to leave you with this. The dead girl's voice, even though it's fictional, is a powerful reminder of how fragile life is, how complex people are, and how important compassion is.
Even though we might never know exactly what happened that night, we can still try to understand, to empathize, to honor the memory of a life cut short. And maybe by exploring this fictional tragedy, we can gain a deeper appreciation for our own lives and the lives of everyone around us.
That's a really beautiful thought, and a great way to end our deep dive. We'd love to hear what you all thought about this incredibly thought-provoking story. Until next time, keep diving deep.